Welcome to the fourth and final class in this series of ceremony DIY. I just want to thank everyone who's been here for all the courses or some of the courses, for bringing your energy here. It's been a really nourishing experience for me, and I hope for all of us. And you're welcome. If you want to engage the chat today, you can open just a couple of housekeeping pieces. There's a mute button on the lower left of your screen. Everyone is default muted at this point, but as we open up to questions or commentary, you want to unmute using the lower left. Why don't we get started? So the subject today is living and sharing a sacred life. And I really feel like this is kind of the juice for both the moment that we're in and the long now of the future that we're co-creating. That there's a very fundamental disruption, or you could say a fundamental phase that we've been through as a species that I call the age of separation. It's also what Charles Eisenstein calls the age of separation. That we've been through a cycle which you could say started with agriculture, but has had exponentiating intensity of a perceived separation between humans and nature, and a perceived separation between matter and spirit. And that those are the two primal separations that have also gifted us with an incredible experience of science, not experience, but the development of science and technology, and also the development of an experience of an individuated ego structure and self. And now here we are in the midst of an experience that many are calling the great equalizer, that is making it abundantly available to all of us, both intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually, that we are all interconnected, and that interconnection is not something we can further deny, that we need to create more omni-considerate ways of being and more omni-considerate ways of creating, and that we're also being invited and asked, and in some ways forced, to evolve into the next stage of our experience of self as a species. So for me, I call this the transition between the age of separation into the age of deep communion. The reason why I use the words deep communion rather than connection or interbeing or oneness is that the way I see what we're doing, I think a lot of times we hold the concept of oneness in this very kind of immature, sloppy way, like it's all one, so it's all good. Or so as though it is all the same. But where we're going right now is actually the elevation of the suchness of each thing. So it's a field of the communion between things that is held in the reality of oneness. And so I call that the age of deep communion. And that's where I'd like to start today in this exploration today of living and sharing a sacred life. So if you can see me, shake your head and just let me know you're with me. You might want, smiling is awesome. I love to see that we're actually animate and alive. It's really helpful. Thank you. Oh, good to be here. Now I feel a little more here. That's very helpful for me. So let's just start. If you're not already on the view of everyone, or of many of everyone, there's 62 of us, so we can't all be on one screen, but if you can't already see a bunch of us, switch to a bunch of us. And let's just start today by looking at whoever it is that you're seeing on your screen. Happen to be seeing me and others, or maybe not me and others. Just take a moment to look around and just see each being as a reflection, a virtualized reflection of the divine. And it's actually helpful if you move a little bit. The image on the screen is actually not real, it's a virtualization, but just see that all these mirrors, and I like the faces, they're good, they're helpful, the movement for the divine. And then also just connect with the reality that the faces you're seeing on the screen are coming from places, real places, all around the world. At least on the screen I see a couple different states, and I think Australia represented. So just take that in for a moment and close your eyes and just palpably feel a field of humans that is real-time connected through virtual expressions of our beautifully divine eyes and faces and bodies, that is real-time connected to each other in different places around this one planet. And just take a few breaths into your body. A few breaths into the physical form that you as a soul occupy, that the singularity of your soul emanates from and expresses through. And as you breathe, take a few deep breaths in and deep breaths out, just filling up the inner body and softening and emptying it. And for a moment, pause the breath. Feel into the stillness of that pause and affirm, I am being. And at a certain moment, you will find yourself breathing again. And with the act of breathing, that's all you need be doing. Affirm, I am doing. You are a fabric of biology manifesting a soul as God. You are a fractal of God manifesting as a human, humaning through the breath. And then just take a snapshot of your own consciousness over the very discrete arc of time from the moment you were looking at faces on the screen to now, feeling the states that you have occupied in that very short and discrete arc of time, and confirm with the words, I am becoming. Just take a few more moments breathing, really feeling the place you occupy that is your physical body, that is the center point of all of your energetic bodies, and that is the place where your soul is currently residing, is incarnate as a human. Just take a few moments to be, do, and become the location you are in the fabric of God's mind. With that, embrace your own space, your own body, your own biology, your own field of sensation with gratitude, because it is a miracle, a constant unfolding miracle of being, doing, and becoming through the vehicle of biology of a human body. Embrace with gratitude your felt experience of living. And just feel this field of connection between humans woven together through a shared intention of ceremony DIY, of doing ceremony for ourselves and sharing it. Just embrace that field with gratitude. And then just expand your awareness a bit more to include the whole roiling bubble of planet Earth, most inclusive in this moment of the human field, of the human, of the Earth body. Just for a moment, embrace it all as a field that is of increased change. And if you can, find your gratitude, regardless of your thoughts and feelings about it. Just embrace it and find that part of you that can say, thank you. This is the texture of life and consciousness on this planet right now. This is the texture of life and death and change on this planet right now. It's what we've got, and thank you. And then gently bring yourself back to your own space, your own body, and the immediate space around your body. And from the inside of you, breathe light and love into the space you occupy, into your body and your immediate space. And feel the field of what you are truly and powerfully, immediately connected to. The people you have spoken with, the conversations you have had, the messages you have shared, the transactions you have engaged, the things you've chosen not to do, the decisions on your plate. Just affirm in your space, the space you occupy, I am powerful. And just feel that and breathe into that. I am powerful. And gently place your hands on your heart and take a few breaths into that. And gently return to this space. Thank you. Hi. So there's so many things it was interesting preparing for today. It was also interesting because yesterday was Earth Day and I was part of a number of different fields of convergences coming together, and it was just so clear the place that we're at. For me, it was very clear that the place that many of us are grappling right now. Are we really powerful? Are we? Do we have any power? What kind of power is it? And I felt that I wanted to really focus on that today. I've been sort of obsessed about that in social media. For those of you who are following me in social media, I haven't been talking about it in terms of power. I've been talking about it in terms of behavior a lot and mindset. Has anyone been following that? Because the reality is that we're in an increasingly disrupted field inside a completely disrupted information ecology. We're in an info war for real. So knowing what's true right now is increasingly hard. Even if the sources were real, it would be really hard because of the level of complexity that we're navigating. And given that the sources are not, that there's a lot of false information moving through the field, more false than real, that also tends to completely deteriorate our capacity for dialogue with others or for sense making. Why am I bringing this up right now in relationship to the sacred? Because when we choose, we are powerful and we own the space that we're in, and the choices of our time, energy, attention, and behavior, we actually can spread the sacred from the center each of us occupy. Let me say that again. We can spread love and coherency, one act and communication at a time, more powerfully now than we have ever been able to do, because the field is increasingly wonky. So coherency in a sea of chaos is more powerful to attract things to it. So I wanted to start there, and kind of in the place where the essential idea that when the power of love transcends the love of power, we will be able to build a culture that is truly sacred. When the power of love transcends the love of power, we will be able to build a world that is truly harmonious. What I notice a lot in spiritual communities is that we polarize love and power. This is a natural, and I just want you to check in with yourself, because for a lot of us, there's different kind of voices around these things inside that play out simultaneously. There's one voice that might say, well, the only real power is love. And there's another voice that might say, beings and systems that are really powerful act in really fucked up ways. Therefore, I don't really want to be powerful. And there's another voice that says, I'm powerful, but you're not really sure how you are powerful, or some variation thereof. And what's interesting in a time like this is that our ability to really identify what is worthy power, and also to embody what is worthy power, what is ethical power, is actually the seat of the sacred. So I wanted to start there with just an invitation to each of us as powerful beings, who are powerful by virtue of the thought, words, and deeds we bring to the field. And to me, this is fundamental and foundational to living and sharing a sacred life at this time, which also might be very, very secular. It does not need to identify itself as spiritual or religious in any way. It's the place where the sacred and the profane meet, is to become more and more skillful at showing up in a way where we are embodying what it is to bring the power of love into our thoughts, words, and deeds. And with that in mind, I wanted to actually read a quote that has moved my life very deeply. This is from, the paraphrase of this quote is community will be the next Buddha. But I'll offer, yeah, thank you, Sherry. Sherry writes, power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. So this is the quote that really brought me into this day, which is from Thich Nhat Hanh. It is probable that the next Buddha will not take the form of an individual, but the next Buddha may take the form of a community practicing understanding and loving kindness, a community practicing mindful living. This may be the most important thing we can do for the survival of the earth. And I would also say that that community is something that will be both local and global. And so it's time, guys. Shall we do it? Awesome. All right. You know, what I'd like to do right now is just open the line up for a few minutes to see if anyone has any questions or any burning comments on what we just did. And then I want to go into, we're going to take this today, is into a number of, you could say, laws of the universe from my vantage point, and from where what I've found to be really helpful in terms of where I sit in myself, and what I call the assumptions, and that you can actually take on as an internal stance that you can be really self-responsible for as you come forward into your life. And they can also be shared, which is very helpful. So I'm opening the lines right now, or the lines are open. If you'd like to share anything, if you have any commentary, burning commentary, or particular questions about what we just did, unmute yourself on the bottom left corner of your screen.
Hi, I have something. Hello.
Hey, Dave.
You can hear me this time. Great. Okay. So yeah, I feel really inspired by this idea of community, and it's so challenging right now with this physical distancing. And I keep finding myself in these beautiful virtual rooms of beautiful people, and now that we're transitioning out of this particular, alchemy. Um, I just want to know how to catch people and like where to go to build this community when when we're all over the world and when we aren't really allowed to leave our homes right now. So I don't know if you have an answer to that.
That's a great question, and it's a hard question right now. But it's also it's actually still a right question to be asking. Like we don't know how long shelter in place will last, and depending on where we are, it will last. It will have different durations, which is also going to have all kinds of unintended consequences and secondary and tertiary effects for those who are privileged to be out of shelter in place or those who are privileged to be in shelter in place. There's going to be a lot of politics that plays around things like that. But it's also still true, there's sort of, in most places, there's what little vestiges of neighborhood phone trees and or what community centers have brought together, or there's an online platform called is it Backyard or something Neighbor? If someone knows what I'm talking about, I'm on it. But
I think it's called Nextdoor.
Nextdoor.
That's right. That it's actually time to make use of those platforms in a really careful and considered way, and that can be very, very powerful. And then there's an option to create Zoom connections with people who are in your neighborhood. Or a really small example is I actually am starting co-creating a community garden in my neighborhood that we'll be doing in person, which is a bit of a civil disobedience, you could say, but it's also, it's a Corona Victory Garden that we're building, but that's a small act in what is likely to become a very important driver as things keep going. Like, we can assume, and this is a very sobering thing to say, but we can assume that this cycle with coronavirus is actually just the first wave in many ways to come. And that's a very sobering thought, but it's also a very rational one that we actually need to grapple with. Climate derangement isn't going to stop just because coronavirus came and went. And there's upstream impacts of coronavirus itself around our food supply and all kinds of other things. And very, very powerful bad actors that are very busy right now while we're all stuck in our homes. And so it's a really critical time to start to migrate to new systems. Steve Morris just wrote to also look for local time banks. Local time banks are ways that you can start to engage exchange within your local community, and is a great place to put your attention. I think we also are going to see on the fairly short horizon the ability to start to open to very small group gatherings. And I think those are going to be incredibly powerful and poignant, and not without risk in terms of the virus, but also worth risking. And I take the risk to say that on this call. I'm not an advocate for breaking through, government requirements around wearing masks in public, for example, but I am an advocate to start to gather with small groups of people if you're very responsible for your contact tracing. So I think that's also something that we will start to see, and that will be actually important to the next stage, both for our emotional well-being and our spiritual well-being and our capacity to organize. So, yeah, I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And also, like, if anyone knows of any sort of ongoing groups that are happening virtually that feel really powerful, I have energy to connect right now and to build more ideas, and I'm sure other people are in the same boat. So maybe leave a link or something in the chat so that we can stay connected.
Awesome. The other thing I would suggest is when you introduce yourself on the call, say where you're from. And I think it's also a really powerful moment when we are on virtual calls to start to identify where we're from and then start to recobble together more local networks. So, and FYI, Daisy, there will be another set of courses after this if you'd like to stay involved here too. I'd love to hear from one more person. Yeah, Andrew.
I have a good question.
Yeah.
So many of us who are online a lot are being inundated with vast amounts of information. And as you noted, we're in this info war right now. And I personally am having trouble distinguishing between what information is actually helpful and life affirming and what is just a perpetuation of the warfare cycle. So if you have some clues about that, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah, I do. I mean, one is obviously you do need to create some boundaries, period. We all do on media consumption. But you also, I mean, you're also a high processor in terms of information. And so you asking is particularly poignant. And I was on a very sobering call with Daniel Schmachtenberger yesterday that kind of like detailed really just how broken the info system is in a way that was, I was already extremely sobered by it and pissed. And that went another layer deeper in a way that was quite surprising for me. There's a few hard and fast rules that I've been learning about. One is if it's in a content area like 5G vaccines that is actually rife with information war. It's actually, I mean, there's a reality to a lot of, we don't actually know how deep the reality of actual conspiracies go, but there's also a reality of info warfare around those topics. So you have to be very, very careful of like, I'm increasingly averse to Facebook threads, for example, that have sources unless there's something that's very clearly peer reviewed from a reputable source, for example. There's certain media outlets that I still trust more highly than others, but I don't feel full trustworthiness in any of them. But The Guardian is one of my favorites, and things from Bloomberg are helpful. Then also, I've been starting to find like more on the ground resources of people who are speaking directly from their perspective in different countries. Like I was on a call this morning with Arundhati Roy from India, which was incredibly sobering and also incredibly helpful just to hear what's actually going on for people in India, and very sobering around just how phenomenally privileged any of us are to be able to sit here on a computer screen and be on Zoom and have this conversation. The link to that is on my Facebook page if you want to find it. It's not like an across the board sense making, but it does go quite deep down the rabbit hole of what's happening in India, which is a mirror for what's happening in some other places. And I do lean very strongly on Rebel Wisdom, which is the site that has been interviewing Daniel Schmachtenberger and Forrest Landry and others, but it's not a news site per se, but it is very helpful for sense making. So those are some sources that are helpful. That's great. A Rebel Wisdom 2-day conference was recently announced. That's good news for those who would like to spend time figuring out what the fuck's going on. Yeah, let me say one other thing about this, and this actually leads us to the next chunk of information of what I was going to share. And I've written a number of posts about this recently, but it's more important to know what you stand for than to know what's true right now. So, in other words, the way we are powerful will not, for a long time, may not necessarily be because we've none of us can actually get to the bottom of everything that's going on. It's actually too complex to do that. But knowing what you stand for is where you can actually stand in power. You know, for example, for me personally, this is my point of view, is that there are reasons why vaccines are awesome. There's some vaccines that have been very harmful. Knowing the actual science on any given vaccine is what actually matters in terms of, like, I'm not overall for vaccines and I'm not overall against them. I'm against crappy vaccines that could hurt people or invade our, you know, or create medical tyranny. But I'm for vaccines that help people to help, you know, global health in substantive ways that don't harm people. So like things like that, just being able to actually get really clear about where your rudder is and then aim towards it is an incredible power right now. You know, similarly, there's our local farmers are suffering, like another issue that no one is talking about, but small local farmers are massively suffering because a lot of their accounts were with restaurants. If you care about food, like there's a lot that can be done with local food systems right now, which requires a lot of agility and a lot of knowledge, but about a very, very particular local system. So part of where we have power right now is recognizing that we're in disruptions of chains of the norm, that where those disruptions are also opportunities. And even though you're stuck in your house, we actually can look at, like, what do I actually care about that I'd be willing and able and skillful at going down that rabbit hole. And when I say going down that rabbit hole, I don't mean just as an info rabbit hole. I mean as a place to offer your time, energy, attention, and creative capacity. So I could say a lot more about that, but I think it's the other thing that we all have power over is our own behavior. And while we can't go out and connect with people, we can figure out how we can connect with people who need help right now. Meaning there are elders in our communities who may be really lonely. There are people who also are in really dire straits around food. Like how can you, each of us, any one of us, or all of us together, be powerful in actually creating better outcomes for people in our field? So those are important things to ask. Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting one around trying to understand what's going on. It's like we need to, another point that is very important is it is worth, and I've said this a couple times on these calls, it is worth getting really clear about what you are good at and finding an end in joy and actually kind of staying in your lane there. Like, how can I do that now? If I'm really good at holding space for people, can I find a way to make myself available to that, for that? If I'm really good at doing transdimensional tarot readings, speaking to you, Andrew, you know, how can I make myself available to offer that right now in a way that's actually useful for people? The point there also being that when there's so much need, it's kind of tempting to go left of center or try to be good at something that you're not as good at. Like my shadow is that I try to be really good at being a systems thinker, and I'm an okay systems thinker. It's not my superpower. My superpower is actually being a healer and a storyteller. So, you know, kind of, it's kind of like, or one of my strengths, I should say. I don't even need to call them a superpower, but getting clear about where your strengths are so that you can actually offer them. Are there any other questions on the line? Okay, let's go on to some principles. How can you get clear on your strengths? You know, I haven't done it yet, but I just found the VIA Strength Finder. which comes out of the positivist psychology community, and is it's VIA Strength Finder or Strengths Finder. I can type it to everyone, and I don't have the link. There's two different ones. The one that's free is the one you want. It's also the more current. It aligns with the more current science. I will be doing it this week. I haven't had time yet, but I've actually been I looked for tools after our conversation about purpose last week, because in a way that the deeper point was not whether you're on purpose, but whether or not we're actually doing the things that are actually in alignment with our strengths and our passions and our capacities. And so that's a really useful tool. Yeah. I think that the VIA character one is the one that you have to pay for. I'm not sure. I could be wrong about that, but there's two different ones. They're both good. So, all right, onward to a few principles. So I will tell you these, I could give you a bunch of these, but I'm going to give you the 4 meatiest, juiciest ones. These are spiritual principles that have helped me understand the laws of the universe and the way things are. Let me just back up a little bit by saying something that I didn't say that's kind of like the whole hypothesis here is that something becomes sacred or more sacred. Either everything is sacred or nothing is sacred. So bringing the sacred into the world from the perspective of being a human is deciding that everything is sacred and then engaging it as such. Let me say that again. Either everything is sacred or nothing is sacred. It's not like some things are sacred and some things aren't. But in a sense, from a human's perspective, bringing the sacred into the world is about recognizing the world as sacred, about giving it that affirmation, that recognition. And from the perspective of many indigenous traditions and from my own experience, there's an animate intelligence to everything, whether that's your own body or a tree or the wind that flows through your local valley or a glass of water, that everything actually has an animate intelligence that is waiting to be met by your recognition that it is animate. So many indigenous traditions say that the true purpose of human beings is to praise, celebrate, and in a sense, name the world, not from the perspective of like naming as a boxing of things, but naming as an elevation of things. Naming as using the power of the word to actually engage an animate conversation with what is. So once you start to approach your life from this perspective, all kinds of cool stuff starts to happen. And we've just talked about some very worldly and practical things, but we can apply this now to like, you're sitting in your room, in your house, and you're like, what am I going to do with myself? And if you apply this principle, like the world is listening, everything is animate, maybe if I engage it that way, it will engage me back. So my really sweet example of that was this morning. I was doing yoga and a mourning dove started singing right outside my window. I've lived here for like 20 months and I've never heard a mourning dove, and mourning doves are my very favorite bird. And one of the things I do every day is I listen to the bird song and then I thank the birds and I invite more birds to come. And there was just something exquisite about the morning dove coming this morning as just as a affirmation of how this principle of meeting the world as sacred and being in dialogue with it is this weaving of a fabric of meaning that helps us to come home to ourselves and also helps elevate the beauty in the world. So, in other words, what you tend tends you back. What you love loves you back. What you talk to talks to you back. So, there are 4 laws that my spiritual father, George Gregel Bertelstein, has taught these over the years, and these are the 4 that I work with really powerfully. They come through a Lakota lineage, but if you look up online Lakota spiritual laws, you'll come up with many, many different versions, and none of them will be this. So you may want to write these down. They're very simple. I'll just name all 4 of them, and then we'll dive into them a bit. Everything is what it is. Everything is what it is. Everything is interdependent. You could say that another way. You could say everything is relationship, or everything is co-relational. Everything is sacred. And everything is changing, or change is the only constant, for the law of impermanence, as the Buddhists describe it. So why does this matter right now? Let's start with everything is what it is. So contemporary education generally teaches us to think symbolically before it teaches us to think, and before it teaches us to have embodied experience. But the way we truly get to know something is by knowing it on its own terms. So, a classic example, or a really great story, is I was on Vision Quest with George and with a very dear friend of mine. And my friend picked up an eagle feather and turned to George and he said, "George, will you tell me about this lore, the lore of this, for this eagle feather?" And George looked at my friend and he said, "Lore? That's no lore. That's an eagle feather." And the invitation here is that, especially when we have time like this, the thing we're being invited to do first spiritually is not to assimilate a bunch of stories about something, but to perceive and relate with something directly. And that is a much more direct route to knowing it and being known by it, and to real wisdom about it, than is what you can read as in the form of a story, or even of data, like external verification. That the first layer of really knowing something is to actually relate with it as it is. The next, and this is very relevant for those of you who are into plant medicine, or into working with sage, or working with any kind of prayer, is that the most primary way to know the thing is to know it, is to ask it about itself. The secondary ways are all the ways we already know how to do relationship. This is also true if you're working to cultivate a relationship with animal medicine. As you know those medicines most directly by actually observing, paying attention to, getting to know the animal. And then secondarily, getting to know both the indigenous narratives around it and the science of its ecology. The next law, everything is interdependent. It's kind of obvious these days. All things are relations. But the deepest way to feel this is to feel yourself as an emergent property of the universe. In other words, separate from the air, or separate from the sun, or separate from the water you drink, or separate from the food you eat, or separate from the mother who raised you, you don't exist. It's actually kind of ludicrous to think that that would be possible. It's entirely impossible. Nothing exists separate from the field of relationships that generate it. And it co-generates all those other things. It's a very deep law when you look at what are right kinds of choices to make in regards to what we do or don't do, or how we steer our society. Because we have, up until now, based our current system in independence rather than interdependence. So we get to re-know the world from the perspective of relationship and rebuild the world from that perspective. Let me say one more thing about these principles. These are ways to re-know yourself in the world. That I think part of what's going on right now is we are, as Paul Selig says, we are being invited, as his guides say, to re-know ourselves in the world right now. These are very powerful places to sit in terms of re-knowing and knowing very accurately, according to first principles, as Sherry said. The next law, everything is sacred. Again, this one, as I spoke to earlier, really sits in the place of declaration, of the vantage that we take, the perspective we take on what is true, and that also defining the quality of relatedness that we have with things. If we think that everything is dead matter, and that we have divine dominion over it as a unique being, we will act differently than if we recognize everything as equally sacred. Additionally, when we recognize everything as sacred, we truly get to cultivate a different kind of relationship with it. An entirely different dimension of meaning arises in our lives. Lastly, each of us has the power to invoke that. And working with that power is really extraordinary. How you find that in yourself is part of claiming sacred practice as a part of your life and a part of your birthright. I think it's so important these days to recognize that we were raised, even if you were raised religious, you were raised in a deeply secularized culture. And that like we're creating new habits to reweave the sacred in the world, in our lives and in the world. So for me, increasingly this meditation of I am being, I am doing, I am becoming, and a very simple prayer in the morning is the way that I anchor that in my days. The appreciation of beauty is also one of the ways you can anchor this. The aesthetic dimension of existence, of living, is interpenetrated with the process of engaging the sacred. It's the beauty way, as Sherry has typed. And then the last, everything is change, or everything is changing, or change is the only constant. Just actually the same as the law of becoming. Nothing stays. And I think right now, more than ever, we're being invited to look at what we assumed to be stable, to actually be more constant internally with our own consciousness, so that we can powerfully navigate and embrace and even steer in change. It is a time that will deconstruct our most dearly held ideas about what we thought we could depend on, but what we can depend on is our capacity to respond. So the ability to embrace change is very, very deeply interwoven with our capacity to respond, our capacity to actually meet what is and to respond to it, as opposed to denying it, fighting it, raging at it. Instead, to meet it and work with it. And in terms of the law of change, pretty much anything Pema Chodron has written is useful. She's really the master teacher that I know around how to be with change in terms of inner mindset and spiritual principles. So let's open this up. I'm going to close here. There's so many things I could share today. But I'm going to close here. Chodron, Chodron. I'll write it in the there. Thank you. I'm going to open up the line to questions and comments, and we'll go until about 10 after. So if you have something you'd love to ask or share, jump in.
Hey, Samantha.
Hi.
Hi. So something that I've been kind of like grappling with during this whole process is like, I know that everything is sacred, but I feel like if I really truly jump into that there's this like big level of responsibility where like, I get that I'm responsible for everything I do and say all the time. And yet like, it's like, there's some little piece of me that goes, I don't really want to be like that responsible, right? Like it feels exhausting, or like I'm not going to do it perfectly. And so, but everything is sacred, right? So like even my own humanness and my own process of that. So it's like this kind of like mind fuck thing where I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm just going to like take a nap, right? Like it seems like a little bit much. And I can't imagine that I'm the only person that feels that way. So I just thought I'd kind of like throw that out there a little bit.
Gorgeous. Thank you for sharing that. That's human. That's very lifey. You know, I think I would say this to you, and I would say this to kind of all of us, is that I really feel like growing up in, like particularly growing up in America, there is this deep interpenetration between our inner perfectionist and the word responsibility.
Mm.
And that responsibility in the spiritual sense in no way requires that you be perfect, because it's a non-dual rule. You know, it's like, it's really an embrace everything rule. But like the inner perfectionist is just like, you know, like that's what's exhausting, right? The one that always wants to get it right. And I can tell you that there's so many tools. One that I actually really love is a tool of getting to know your inner perfectionist critic. And like, well, your inner critic and your inner, God, the framework just disappeared out of my brain, but like, look at how this inner critic and then this one that wants to get it like perfect and right, like lacks this part in the middle that can just be a realist, because it's actually the realist that can collaborate with that responsibility really elegantly, of like, oh, I'm not going to always get it right. I'm going to do my best. My best isn't always perfect. And I'm going to kind of steer in here. I find that to be a helpful one. I also, you know, I would also say, you know what I would actually, the other thing I would say about it, Amy, is that I turned 48 this year, and there is some kind of increasing humor that I feel around the, like, the aspect of my own human experience that is incredibly fallible. And I rarely get as much done in a week as I want to get done, but I'm learning how to manage my expectations about that always in a better way, but I'm also learning how to like have a sense of humor about it and just love that I'm that ambitious and all of those things. So and just kind of, there's another part of me that wants to say, like, somehow we have to learn how to take be really self-responsible in a way that also has this kind of levity. And yeah, and I also know I can feel you have that capacity. Like, so I just offer that to you.
I'm curious about ceremony, the framing for this, and I'm feeling that both there is creation of ceremony and there's an aspect of experiencing life as ceremony with intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
That there's been so many different threads woven throughout these 4 sessions. I'd love to kind of bring it into that.
Beautiful. Yeah, I would say that what I've primarily dealt with in these 4 sessions is the life as ceremony part of the ceremony. And I haven't dealt a lot with the ceremony part of the ceremony. But since that's a great question. And by the way, my intention has been to offer a next module that is really about the ceremony part of the ceremony. But to, you know, it's so interesting. Daily ritual is so key, I think, at least to my sanity and my well-being. And so there is the question, like, and it's a lovely time to get kind of creative about that, of like, what is the arc of my daily ceremony? You know, do I have the 30 minutes I do in the morning and then I go about my day, or do I like frame my morning so that I experience my whole day as a ceremony? You know, I like to have like this flexible duration morning practice that just helps me to show up in my day in a way that's really grounded. And like, and then do you have bedtime rituals? Are there prayers or rituals that you do then? You know, but the container of an essential arc of ceremony is always about opening in gratitude, the meat of the practice, and a clear closing that both closes the container and offers the mana of that to all beings. That's like the really simple arc. So, you know, in terms of doing your own, for example, if you want to do your own psychedelic ceremony, if you want to frame your meditation as a ceremony, or frame a personal dance practice or hike even as a ceremony, that you open the gate with gratitude. You, to go back to prayer that we work with in one of the, you work with the gratitude, what you're asking for help with and what you want. And then you surrender that and you go into the arc of the experience, trusting that this law of, this kind of discursive law of the universe, of it's all relatives and it's all sacred, will work with you in the process, and there will be change. And then actually creating a clear ending. And I think that, I mean, in terms of safe set and setting and doing work with oneself or with a small group, I cannot emphasize enough how important the ending is. And I think that that's the part that usually gets kind of fluffed off, because it's the place where we have least stamina and least awareness a lot of the time. And it's actually really important. It's like the universe likes circles that complete themselves. And when you close a circle, you open another one up. So those are the things that are really fundamental. Being with things in ceremonial space as animate. So like, I approach all ceremonial work as the expansion of my conversation with all that is, including myself, my own psyche, my shadow material. I don't use the word shadow material very often, but the things I'm struggling with, the places where I meet my own Achilles heels, and the more acute things that might arise. And then also the things that where it's the like reaching up to the golden tree to see, you know, how high I can rise, how clear I can be. And then also very much including the discursive fabric of the larger world. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about bringing in things like Daniel Schmachtenberger's teachings, is for me that whole system's knowledge is very much a part of ceremony, because I enter ceremony not to contact some generalized experience of the sacred, but to get very, very specific about how I have leverage and traction in the world by virtue of expanding my consciousness and then being really supported to engage from a place that is wise and refined and aligned. Yeah. Yeah, and that's something I'm a real advocate for. I think that wisdom isn't just something, it's both internal competencies, and it's also our ability to face what's going on in the external world in a way that's incredibly rigorous and sober. So you know that about me, but thank you for asking. Let's see, we have time for one more question.
I have a question.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hi, you talked a session ago about our soul's essence being our place or location in the mind of God. And I think about our soul's purpose as inhabiting that place in the greater ecology. And I was wondering, what do you think of as the coordinates of that location?
Well, you're in it.
I'm in it. But you know, everyone has their own unique location that they're discovering by and by and feeling into through resonance. And I was just wondering if you had anything more to say about that.
Well, I think the location is actually your location. Like, you're not you. You're not in your body. But I feel like we're becoming what I call more resident all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the definition of residence is when you actually really anchor in all your soul codes and you're like really fully ensouled in your body. You've healed enough trauma that you're really capable of being fully present and fully embodied. And you've also become adept enough at really getting that you are being, doing, and becoming all the time. We're never just being. You'd be dead. You'd be a non-thing. To incarnate is to be, do, and become simultaneously. So like there's residence is sort of starting to develop the mastery of feeling from the inside out that you are a verb, and to get to know your verb. Like the seat of awareness is being. The seat of incarnation is it's a process. You know, as you speak to me, you're doing. And as we relate with each other and I have a real conversation where we're actually listening, we're being changed, we're becoming. So really skillful residence is getting that, like, your seat inside your body and as your consciousness incarnate in the fact of you unfolding into the world is your seat of power. It's your seat of love. And so I think of residence as like really maturing as the soul inside of our body, which is to also like claim the space you occupy in the universe. It's to claim your location. It's to inhabit it really skillfully. Yeah. And so, and from like, I don't usually work with the language of soul retrieval, but I do think that our energies get scattered and dissipated. So, you know, part of what we're doing is we're healing, is we're surrendering dissipation, dissociation, ways in which we resist being fully present. We're bringing that all back into this singularity that we inhabit inside our body and as our space in the universe.
Mm-hmm. I think what I hold it a little differently, just thinking about how all of our souls are composed uniquely,
Mm-hmm.
based on our ancestors, based on where we were born, based on our soul's giftings, based on past life experiences and karmas.
For sure. I mean, I agree with all of that.
And
I
just
agree
that
with all of that.
all of that kind of coordinates us into a particular place if we allow it to lead us.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think that all of those things, I absolutely agree with you. But those things still all converge on you in your body.
Yeah, yes.
And in the life that you've incarnated into.
Mm-hmm. I mean, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with you, actually. I think that all of those things are part of that whole hologram and constellation. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
And it's, I mean, there's layers to it too. It's like when we're doing ancestral work, there is a reality that the way I've seen it is that like, because you're incarnate, you're at the front of the line. So how we work with those fields, you know, again, you're the ownership of your location that's connected through this field. And all of that is still converging in your own choices. So in your own presence. Thank you. Good stuff, folks. Thank you. I feel very hesitant to get off this call. I'm like, no, this is so fun. So just to let you all, I'd like to let you know what I'm doing. You will get a follow-up email from me. My intention actually is to offer this course one more time with a bit more clarity and possibly a little bit of homework material. And then to open it up to everyone who has done it for a level 2 that specifically engages the pathways of One Life Circle ways of doing ceremony and supports you to do DIY psychedelic work. And that will be paid, but with a very broad sliding scale. And but I want to do this class one more time so that we can involve more people, and also so that I can refine the material, because I'm committed to offering it as a wisdom bundle for people with more practices that are a little more codified. And so if you'd like to join that again, I'd love to do it with you. I will invite you. And if you don't want to join it again, that's fine. If you're interested in doing the second course, I'll be sending out invites to that. I'm also working, and this is like my tech clunkiness, but I'm working on bundling all these classes so that you can buy the bundle if you'd like them. That a lot of people request that. So I'm working to do that. And the last thing I wanted to offer, I'm going to pull this up right now, is if anyone was inspired and called to offer donations and hasn't, I would really love to pay those donations forward to an initiative that a really dear old friend of mine named Ashel Seasons has started, that is bringing food and juices and natural medicines to people of color in the Bay Area. And so I'm gonna put that link in right now. And if any of you felt called to give a donation to me for this class, I would be so very, very, very grateful if you would play that forward to people who need it. And one of the messages that I think a lot of us are really attentive to is, well, I perceive I'm interested in creating a world where we all take responsibility for our indigeneity to the planet as a whole and to particular places. But meanwhile, our indigenous relatives and people of color have carried a huge burden around that for the last number of generations. So I feel that I personally am interested in doing my part to support people. So I've just sent a link, and if you have any inclination to offer any donation, I'd be very grateful if you'd follow that link and pay it forward to friends of ours. Thank you. Yes, it's on my Facebook page, and I will repost it right now, so it's at the top of the page. And I love you.
Hello, Samantha. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for a wonderful class.
Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha.
Mm.
Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you.
Thanks to all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Sam.